For almost 6 years, Denver, Colorado, had been my home, and though the winters were notoriously erratic, this one had been especially harsh. As Thanksgiving drew near, forecasts warned of a massive winter storm set to hit the city, promising unprecedented snowfall. The news sent everyone into a frenzy, with many choosing to stay home rather than brave the treacherous roads. Initially, I hadn't planned to travel for the holiday. My family was in California, and I'd grown accustomed to celebrating Thanksgiving with friends. But this year, my plans unraveled at the last moment when a coworker, who had invited me over, had to cancel due to a family emergency. Suddenly, I found myself facing the holiday alone in my apartment, staring down the prospect of takeout dinners and endless reruns of old sitcoms. It was then that Ethan texted me. Ethan and I had met 3 years ago at a friend's game night, bonding over our mutual love of bad horror movies and an embarrassing shared history of high school theater. He was the kind of guy who could light up any room he walked into. Charming, quick-witted, and effortlessly easygoing. He was also, for lack of a better term, completely out of my league. Tall, athletic, with an easy confidence that made him seem untouchable. We had settled into a comfortable friendship, though there had always been an unspoken tension between us, something neither of us had ever acknowledged. When his message popped up, I wasn't surprised. Ethan had a way of knowing when I needed company, even when I hadn't said anything. "Hey, my Thanksgiving plans got wrecked too. Want to ride out the storm together? Got plenty of food and beer." I hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude. Dude, just get over here before the roads turn into death traps." That was all the convincing I needed. By the time I packed an overnight bag and made my way to Ethan's apartment, the first flakes of snow had already begun to fall. The streets were still manageable, but the air carried the weight of the storm to come. When I arrived, Ethan greeted me at the door with his signature easy grin and a bottle of beer in hand. "Welcome to the Thanksgiving disaster shelter," he said, stepping aside to let me in. His apartment was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon, probably from the candles he had scattered around. The kitchen counter was already stacked with supplies. Bags of chips, a roasted turkey Ethan had miraculously managed to procure, and an impressive collection of side dishes that looked like they had been prepped with at least some level of care. "You actually cooked?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I surveyed the spread. Ethan scoffed. "Please, my sister cooked. She dropped it all off this morning before bailing on me to go spend the holiday with her boyfriend's family." He gestured to the food. "But I'll totally take credit if it impresses you." I chuckled and set my bag down. Color me impressed. We spent the evening as casually as we always did, eating too much food, swapping stories, and laughing over ridiculous Thanksgiving memories. Outside, the snowstorm worsened, the wind howling against the windows, but inside, it felt strangely peaceful. The power flickered a few times, but held steady. We had gathered blankets on the couch, and at some point, Ethan turned on an old holiday movie, the kind that was so cheesy it was almost endearing. The warmth of the apartment, the dim lighting, and the lull of the storm created a bubble of intimacy I wasn't expecting. Then Ethan stretched, his shirt riding up slightly as he reached for another beer. "Man, it's getting hot in here," he said, pulling the fabric over his head and tossing it aside. I swallowed hard, suddenly hyper-aware of the way the dim lighting cast shadows over his toned chest. "Maybe that's because you're sitting under 3 blankets," I said, forcing myself to sound casual. Ethan smirked. "You calling me dumb?" I rolled my eyes. "I'm just saying, maybe consider the possibility." The banter was familiar, easy, but there was something else beneath it tonight, something heavier. I noticed the way Ethan's gaze lingered, the way his knee brushed against mine and didn't move away. My heart pounded, but I didn't dare say anything, afraid of misreading the moment. And then, Without thinking, without overanalyzing, I leaned in. Ethan didn't pull away. He didn't hesitate. His lips met mine, and suddenly, the room felt even warmer. The sound of the storm outside became nothing more than a backdrop to the electricity crackling between us. Morning arrived with a soft, eerie quiet. The snowfall had blanketed the city, leaving everything untouched and still. I woke up to the faint smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the kitchen. For a brief moment, I wondered if the night before had been a dream. But then I turned over and saw Ethan standing by the stove, shirtless, his hair messy from sleep. He glanced over and grinned. "Morning, sleeping beauty," I groaned, sitting up and rubbing my face. "That's the line you're going with?" Ethan chuckled and set a mug of coffee on the table. Seemed fitting. I hesitated before taking it, my mind racing with the weight of what had happened. The air between us was different now, charged with something unspoken. And yet, Ethan didn't seem uncomfortable. If anything, he looked entirely at ease. "You good?" he asked, leaning against the counter. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, just processing." Ethan's expression softened. "Look, I don't know what this means yet," he admitted. "But I know I don't regret it." A slow warmth spread through my chest. "Me neither." He smiled, and just like that, some of the tension eased. We didn't need to define anything right away. We had time. Outside, the world was frozen in place, but inside, something new was beginning. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to see where it led. The days following the storm were a blur of quiet moments and tentative exploration. Ethan and I didn't talk much about what had happened that night, but it lingered between us, a quiet understanding that something had shifted. We fell back into our usual rhythm, joking, teasing, spending hours debating the merits of terrible movies. But there was a new layer to our interactions, a subtle undercurrent of something more. The snowstorm had left the city in a state of suspended animation. Roads were impassable, businesses were closed, and the world outside Ethan's apartment felt distant and unreal. It was as if we had been granted a temporary reprieve from reality, a pocket of time where nothing else mattered but the two of us. One afternoon, as we sat on the couch watching the snow fall outside, Ethan turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about something." I raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerous." He smirked and threw a pillow at me. "Shut up. I'm serious." I caught the pillow and set it aside, turning to face him. "Okay, what's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering to the window before meeting mine. "What if we, I don't know, tried this? Like, for real?" I felt my heart skip a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. "Tried what, exactly?" He rolled his eyes, though there was a hint of nervousness in his smile. "You know what I mean. Us. Dating. Or whatever." I blinked, caught off guard by his directness. "Are you serious?" Ethan shrugged, though his casual demeanor didn't quite mask the vulnerability in his eyes. "Yeah. I mean, I've never really thought about it before, but I don't know. It feels right. With you." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Ethan had always been the kind of person who seemed to float through life without a care in the world, never tied down by anything or anyone. The idea that he was serious about this, about us, was both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't want to mess this up," I admitted quietly. "You're my best friend, Ethan. I don't want to lose that." He nodded, his expression softening. "I get that, and I don't want to lose you either. But I also don't want to ignore this. I think we could be good together." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten. I wanted to believe him, to believe that this could work. But the fear of what might happen if it didn't was hard to shake. "Okay," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let's try it." Ethan's face broke into a wide grin. and he pulled me into a hug. "You won't regret it," he said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. I wasn't sure if that was true, but in that moment, I didn't care. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope, a flicker of possibility that maybe, just maybe, this could be something real. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. We navigated the complexities of our new relationship with a mix of excitement and trepidation. There were moments of pure joy, lazy mornings spent in bed, spontaneous road trips to nowhere, quiet evenings where we simply existed together. But there were also moments of doubt and insecurity. One evening, as we sat on the floor of Ethan's apartment eating takeout, I found myself staring at him, trying to reconcile the person I had known for so long with the person he was becoming to me. "What?" Ethan asked, catching my gaze. I shook my head, smiling faintly. "Nothing. I'm just trying to figure you out." He raised an eyebrow. "Figure me out? I'm not that complicated." I laughed, though there was a hint of frustration in my voice. "You kind of are. You're this larger-than-life person who everyone loves, and I'm just me. I don't know how I fit into all of this." Ethan set his food down and turned to face me, his expression serious. "You fit because you're you. I don't need you to be anyone else. You're my best friend, and you're the person I want to be with. That's all that matters." His words should have been enough to ease my doubts, but they lingered, a quiet undercurrent of insecurity that I couldn't quite shake. As the weeks turned into months, our relationship deepened, but so did the challenges. Ethan's ex-girlfriend, Claire, reached out to him, wanting to reconnect. They had ended things amicably, but her sudden reappearance stirred up old feelings and insecurities. One evening, after Ethan had spent the day with Claire, he came over to my apartment, his expression troubled. "We need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I braced myself, my stomach twisting into knots. "What's going on?" He sat down on the couch, running a hand through his hair. "Claire wants to get back together. She says she made a mistake, that she still loves me." I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. "And what do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with conflict. "I don't know. I care about her, but I also care about you. I don't want to hurt either of you." The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to tell him to choose me, to fight for what we had. But I also knew that I couldn't force him to feel something he wasn't ready for. "You need to figure out what you want," I said finally. "And whatever you decide, I'll respect it." Ethan nodded, his expression pained. "I just need some time to think." The days that followed were agonizing. I tried to give Ethan the space he needed, but it was hard not to feel like I was losing him. I threw myself into work, into hobbies, into anything that would distract me from the uncertainty. But no matter how busy I kept myself, my thoughts always circled back to him. Finally, one evening, Ethan showed up at my door. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice rough. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. We sat down on the couch, the air between us thick with tension. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his eyes fixed on his hands. "And I realized that I can't go back to Claire. What we had was great, but it's in the past. What I have with you, it's different. It's real." Relief washed over me, but I kept my expression neutral. "Are you sure?" He looked up at me, his gaze steady. "I've never been more sure of anything. I don't want to lose you. You're my best friend, and you're so much more than that. I want to see where this goes." I felt a smile tug at the corners of my lips. "I want that too." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. We navigated the complexities of our new relationship, learning how to balance our friendship with the growing intimacy between us. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. We laughed, we argued, we made up, And through it all, we grew closer. As the months passed, the storms that had once defined our relationship became a distant memory. We faced new challenges together, from work stress to family drama, but we faced them as a team. And in the quiet moments, when it was just the two of us, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before. One evening, as we sat on Ethan's balcony watching the sunset, he turned to me with a smile. "You know," he said, "I think that storm was the best thing that ever happened to us." I laughed, leaning into him. "Yeah, I think you might be right. The storm had brought us together, but it was the calm after that had allowed us to build something real." And as I looked out at the city skyline, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together,